a lot, Brian, but and probably sometimes the easiest way for me to explain it to people who aren't familiar with county government is to make a comparison to the school district. People are very familiar with, for instance, the role of the superintendent, who is the person who manages the business affairs of the school district and reports to a school board. And the functions are a little bit differently, and the statutes of the state set those up a little differently. But essentially, city manager is the chief administrative official for the city under the council manager form of government, and reports to the mayor and city council, is hired by the mayor and city council to oversee all of the departments and functions of city government.
And so you're really in charge of the day-to-day operations of.
Yeah, that's correct. And day-to-day operations, and my responsibility is budgetary and providing advice to the city council so that the council can establish policy.
So council establishes policy, establishes the tax rate, establishes the budget. Your job is to administer that.
That's correct, yes.
So you've been in Kennedale now for 4 years?
4 years, it'll be 4 years in April.
All right. And so what are the biggest challenges in your mind in facing Kennedale right now?
Well, obviously, the city of Kennedale is adjacent to some major cities in the metropolitan area of Dallas and Fort Worth, and it's an area that is ripe for growth and development. And obviously, cities pretty much in the metropolitan area expands from the inside out, and with the growth that's been experienced in other cities, include around us, Fort Worth, Mansfield, Arlington. Kennedale is ripe for development, whether we really want it to occur or not. And we have a lot of activity going on right now, and that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. So issues relating to infrastructure are huge challenges for the city, including streets and storm drainage and water and sewer, in order to accommodate the growth that's going to occur. And we have a significant amount of vacant property. So there's room for growth and development, and we have to be able to accommodate that the best we can. So I think that's the biggest challenge facing us.
Well, as we know that Kennedale relies heavily, more heavily than a lot of cities, on property taxes as opposed to sales tax. That's out of whack. How does a city like Kennedale get it more balanced?
Well, it's difficult because it's one of the issues that we deal with in terms of economic development activity. Because clearly, in order to create the retail kind of development that we would all like to see and have, you have to have residential development to support that kind of growth that would expand our sales tax base. So we try to balance, and obviously cities don't want to have all of their revenue come from sales tax. They don't want to have all of it come from ad valorem property taxes, because there needs to be a balance. The economy dramatically impacts sales tax, for instance. So you want to have a solid ad valorem tax base, but you also need to have that retail element in the mix so that you can keep that tax rate as low as possible and still provide the kinds of service in a first-class manner that citizens want to have.
But isn't one of the big debates, and it has been, is what kind of housing, right? Do you want a greater density? Do you want 1 acre lots? It's a debate that has really no right or wrong answers, but people debate about what they want to see.
Right.
So.
Right, and what we're seeing now, particularly, I mean, with the millennials, and obviously there are a lot of us in that group, you and I, Brian, who are in the aging group, and so who want different kinds of things in housing. And so many of us who might have wanted a single family house with lots of space a few years ago are no longer particularly interested. So the mix of housing is important to a community if we want to accommodate all of the people that we want to attract and have a good mixture so that it improves the quality of life. So Kennedale has a lot of very nice residential properties and a lot of really nice housing units. We've got a lot of vacant land that can eventually be developed. We don't have a lot of housing for those of us who are going to be looking for senior housing in the future, or who are looking for it now and want to have less property to take care of. So we're trying to evaluate the best way to create that mix and provide as much housing as possible. And some of that needs to be affordable housing that seniors and others can afford. And again, we're seeing less demand on a normal basis for large residential lots and 3,000 square foot houses as opposed to smaller properties and housing that's easier to maintain. And that's just a function, I guess, of how we've socialized ourselves and how our attitudes toward that has changed from generation to generation.
Well, I'm gonna, like I said, I've asked people to ask questions in the chat, and I've got one here. I think that point that the lack of lucrative business development opportunity places an oversized burden on property owners as a source of operating revenue for this city. This is an unsustainable business model. What concrete suggestions do you have for attracting businesses to better balance the city finances? So in other words, what is it that we can do that will attract more businesses into the city?
Well, and that's
That's
exactly
residential.
that's what we were just talking about is, and we're trying to achieve that by one, our land use planning and our comprehensive plan to determine where retail types of development that would generate sales tax can go, where manufacturing or industrial can be located so that we can draw more heavily on that ad valorem property tax as opposed to sales tax. But again, particularly the retail has to have residential development in order to have people to go shop there. I hear a lot of folks say, quit looking at and spending time looking at residential development, because what we need is a grocery store, or what we need is a Brahms, or what we need is a retail development. And I don't disagree with that. But those businesses who study the demographics of a community are not going to locate in the community until they're confident that there is the residential base there of people who will shop and who will spend their money. So our objective is to try to look at, for instance, what we're looking at up in the Oak Crest area with trying to get commercial development in that area that was started several years ago, to keep that moving, to get different kinds of housing in place, and to really be open to those kinds of developments in a way that maybe we haven't spent as much time opening our arms to in the past.
Well, so the question, another follow-up question is, we've had about a 30% population growth in the last 10 years. Do we have any retail that can be attributed to that growth?
Not a lot. We have some. We've issued some business permits and certificates of occupancy even this last year, but not a lot. You can look at, and when the city initiated the town center project, obviously we've got a lot of empty space in the town center. Would like to see more retail in that area, but I think, and I'm giving my opinion at this point, and I'm not pointing fingers or casting shadows, it's just that the layout of the town center is not probably as optimum as it could be for exposure for folks using 287. One of the things that we're really trying to do to attract that business is working carefully with the Council of Governments on what we call a complete streets program, where we're seeking their help to determine how we can redesign the parkway from 287 or I-20 all the way to the south end of the city, so that it's more attractive to retail development, so that it's more attractive to motorists. There is a lot of traffic that drives down to business 287, but there's a tendency not to look and view that as a place to stop and shop and spend their money. So if we can do some things to redesign within the right of way that's there, much like was done in Rosedale and Fort Worth over the last 15 or 20 years, within that same right of way, you can build medians and you can narrow the lanes in order that you can slow traffic down somewhat, and people will look for, and in the town center itself, create monuments so that it's visible to people driving down the street and they know what to expect, so that it becomes a destination rather than something they see as they pass by it and didn't have opportunity to stop. So that complete streets and working with the parkway itself, that's an incredible asset to the community if we do the things that it takes to utilize it the best way that it can be used. There are good examples in the Metroplex. And again, I mentioned Rosedale. That's a good example. If you remember what Rosedale was 25 years ago, it's a different place today. And that's because the city concentrated on making those kinds of improvements.
Yeah, I think COG has, I mean, they're interested, I know they're interested in the Complete Streets project as a redevelopment project. But so the follow-up question somebody asked was, well, if we haven't seen a lot of growth in 10 years, what makes you think more residential will make any difference?
On the retail development? I mean, is that the question?
Yeah, if we haven't seen that much more retail.
Well, there's no way to guarantee it, but look at what's happening in the Metroplex. Look at what's happening. I mean, I've been in other cities and you've been around the Metroplex a long time, and you can see what happens when those cities, and I'm not comparing us to Frisco or Southlake, but I am saying that when there is good residential development and a good transportation system where people can get around in the city easily, then there's a tendency for people to say, I want to relocate there. It becomes a destination. And if we can do that in a way that encourages people to stop and shop in Kennedale rather than driving 2 miles over to Little Road or in Southwest Arlington, then we've made progress. And examples show us that that works. If we can get the residential development, it will eventually attract the commercial development that works to our advantage.
So I think, in my opinion on that too, is that if you were to take a dot and you were put in the town center and you do a circle 3 miles out of the town center, you're looking at growth that looks pretty good to the east, but 3 miles to the west, you're not seeing things out in Rendon and that area. That's fairly empty. And if I'm a business, aren't I looking at the complete circle? I mean, we can't just say you've gone from 5,000 to 8,000. That may not be the threshold that you need to attract those businesses. It probably needs to be higher than that to get those businesses in here. And it can't be just Kennedale. It's got to be whatever's west to us as well.
Well, it has to be what's west to us as well, but it also means we've got to be realistic about what we would attract won't be identical to what it is in Mansfield today. It won't be identical to what it is in Arlington today. But it can begin to build those and draw the interest of those commercial businesses and entities that look very, very carefully at the demographics when they're considering relocation or opening a business.
So I'm going to sort of shift gears here because there's a good point made in the chat that when we start talking about all this, you have to have the physical infrastructure in place to attract a lot of these things. I mean, what are we doing to upgrade roads, water and sewer lines, and things of that nature?
Right.
They have to be priorities, right?
They what?
They have to be priorities, right?
Well, absolutely. And you're aware, we're working very carefully right now with our engineers. We've got a number of projects on the table that are anxious to develop some additional residential in different parts of the city. And we have inadequate water and wastewater facilities, particularly wastewater. We have sewer lines, for instance, that are 8-inch lines that flow into 6-inch lines. That's backwards from what you would anticipate. And so even where we have those facilities today, Some of them need to be replaced and refreshed so that they can accommodate the land area as it begins to develop. So we're working with the council and trying to determine the best things we can do and how we can prioritize water and wastewater projects, road projects. You're aware that the county is now in the process of considering a rather large bond election. I don't think they've had one since about, when was the last one?
2006.
2006. So it's been a long time. We want to be sure that we are prepared to submit projects for that county-wide bond program when they do a call for projects. And if they're looking at an election in November, then we want to be prepared to be at the table to have some of our needed projects in the way of roads, roadways particularly, on that program. And there are other things that the county program might include. It will include, and we're at a disadvantage. And I want to make that clear too, that and what we have to realize is that larger cities in Tarrant County, and I'm talking about Fort Worth and Arlington and North Richland Hills, and the cities that have much larger staff, people who can prepare plans and do design and develop the programs to submit when that call for projects is made by the county. They submit bigger projects that are more expensive and they have a better chance. That's just a function of the process because those projects will serve more people. So that's going to get a lot of attention on the scoring of those projects when that county bond program is being designed. But we're getting in gear right now to come to council to talk about what projects we could submit so that we can start getting that infrastructure in place that will accommodate the growth that we are convinced is going to occur in the interest that's coming to Canada. We get calls all the time about projects, some of which want to move forward, but the infrastructure isn't there, particularly sewer service.
So when we
But
go,
we've also done a lot, and I know we've done a lot in the last year and a half to help overcome some of that problem with just the integrity of our water system, with our contracting with the city of Arlington and the improvements that we're making and that we're about to implement finally with the customer billing and the infrastructure itself and the water connections to the city of Arlington system. So it takes a mix of all of those kinds of projects, but we're very busy working on a lot of that.
well, let's go back to the county bond program. From my understanding, it's going to be about $400 million. Not all at once. There's going to be discretionary money, from my understanding, for each of the commissioners to spend over a period of 10 years, which there was discretionary money last time as well. But they'll pay half usually is what they do.
Right.
Unless you have a third party, if you have the federal government willing to chip in as well, you can do it that, or the state or whatever. But when we look at our projects, for example, we're going to also be limited on how much money we actually have. So for example, if you decide that if you're the council and you say, okay, we want to do the bridge that crosses, makes a crossover from Little Road heading toward Linda Road, if we wanted to do that, the cost of the bridge itself might preclude us as that being our only project.
That's correct, because if in fact the county's policy and practice and what they're asking for is what's the total cost of that project, we'll include 50% of that in the bond program in year 4 or whatever. The city needs to come up with the other 50%. We've got to identify our funding source to be ready to move that ahead. And then by the time the project comes up, if the cost has escalated and we haven't estimated it properly, it could become even more of a burden. But that's part of the process of doing the design, having the right people involved in it and getting ahead of the game a little bit. The county hasn't made the call for projects yet, but we're anticipating that and are trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit to get ready for it.
And I want to, we're going to have money that's going to be freed up from previous debt that we'll be able to also do other projects with, including other parts of other roads that we need to do. Absolutely. And then we should have some money freeing up from the water and sewer fund to do some of the water and sewer projects. But
Right.
most cities, if you look at their infrastructure report card, it's not good. Cities have traditionally put off a lot of infrastructure.
It's very easy to do that, and Kennedale is no exception. Some, particularly streets. I mean, I drove streets all over the city just in the last couple of days, and there are a lot of street projects that I wish we could fund improvements for in older parts of the city. And that's where the priority setting process comes into play. But it's also very easy to put those kinds of things off if it drives the issuance of debt that causes the tax rate to go up. So what we've been identifying to the council is what is our capacity to issue debt without an increase in the tax rate? And what projects would we suggest to the council could be accomplished if you wanted to go to the voters with a bond election, understanding that the voters would tell us whether getting those projects on the ground is worth some kind of a tax rate increase. And if they say yes, then we move forward. If they say no, we don't.
So we've heard a lot about growth, and it seems like some of it takes a while to materialize, right? Because I know in the last 4 years, we've approved a lot of projects, but they just see slowly beginning to get off the ground, like the one at Sublet and Wildcat Way. You know, what's taken the time here to get these things moving?
Well, obviously, when we'd like to see everything happen as quickly as possible, when the council approves a zoning case, that's what it is a zoning case. The city doesn't have much influence over the time frame that the developers determine they can get their financing, that the market is right to get in the marketplace and start the project. In the last year, projects like Magnolia Hills that you're mentioning and the Oaks Court, for instance, at Kennedale Sublet and Little Road, both were impacted to some degree by the COVID issues. And there was also some change in, I think, ownership and management on the Magnolia Hills project. But for a number of reasons, that project was delayed, but I think it was mostly related to the market conditions because of COVID. I was out there yesterday, and the fact is that project, and we've done a walkthrough on that project, the infrastructure is nearly complete at this point. And if we haven't gotten any building permit requests for that project yet, I anticipate that we will be getting them very soon. I know that we already have at least one home under construction in the Oaks Court project. And of course, we have other projects that the council's more recently approved zoning for that are considering when, in fact, it's time to pull the trigger on development. The Moderna project, we have some folks looking at least other development in southwest Kennedale, particularly in the New Hope Road area, that could happen. But there's no way for the city to determine with the developers when it's time to pull the trigger and do the development. But we have probably 15 projects that I have reported to the council on what the current status of those projects are. Another one that council's approved zoning for is out on Kennedale Sublet Road at Joplin, right there near the Kroger store, right on the city limits boundaries. But that's both retail and residential development on that project.
So I guess the next question, because, well, first off, there's always the question of how do you communicate this with the residents, right? Getting solid information out there that they can rely upon. What strategies do we have in place to try to make sure we get that information out to the residents?
You're talking about the information about the status of these kinds of development
or just
projects?
What's going on in the city as a whole?
Well, I mean, and clearly there are probably ways and things we could do better than we've been doing. I know that we have folks here who maintain the city's website, and we try to keep information out there on some things, but development types of projects, probably not to the extent that we should or could. Obviously, we're available anytime anybody has questions about that. We can respond or get somebody to respond to them about the status of it. I know, for instance, there's an interest in, and we've worked for the last 3 years on just the realignment of Kennedale Sublet Road out there by the Kroger Shopping Center and the widening of that road. It's in Arlington. We have a keen interest in it. There's value to Kennedale to have that done. So we try to keep up on when that's going to happen. And I think the design of it is now probably 80% complete. I don't remember the date that they plan on actually starting that construction project.
It was supposed to be this year.
I think it is, but I'd have to go back. I can't remember the last thing I was told by the city of Arlington on what their schedule is, but I think it is this year. So, I mean, we try to get information out. We've got our customer service on our water billing that's about to change this next week. And we're putting information in our utility bills that will go out. We did, I think, at the end of December, and Arlington will have information welcoming customers to that system this next billing cycle, 1st of February. We'll have that information on our website. Leslie does a pretty good job of trying to keep it posted on various social media sites if it's something that we believe there are citizens interested in knowing or that we need them to know about. You know, the unfortunate part, sometimes it's a double-edged sword, but we don't have the Star Telegram, for instance, reporting here all the time. We've got a couple of local media outlets that do a good job and that ask us a lot of questions, and we try to provide that. I don't really know what the access to that is or how much readership or information that's had, but we as a city probably need to be promoting those to help people understand that's a place they can go get information that might not attract the attention of the local television stations or the Fort Worth Star Telegram or the Dallas Morning News. But we've got some good folks working on that here in Kennedale and our own website that hopefully we are being somewhat effective in getting information out.
So, but the communication, I think the tough part has always been is that why would you go to the Kennedale website, right? The City of Kennedale website, unless it becomes a habit to go look for that news, isn't it? And I know we send out the Roundabout Kennedale as a news source as well. Shifting gears, the comp plan. You know, I've heard people say that we obey the comp plan very specifically. Now, we adopted the comp plan in 2012, and then 2017, I think we had a series of almost 25 meetings around the city.
Around 20 community meetings.
Around 20 meetings around the city and with HOAs and other groups to get input on the comp plan and what they thought of it, which we did over a period of about a year. But what does the comp plan have any legal status when it comes to a city zoning?
Well, it is different than a zoning ordinance, but clearly it is a comprehensive plan that is just that. It is a plan that we've committed will be a guide, and that we are committed to using that guide. And anytime zoning comes up, we look at it in the shadow of the comprehensive plan to determine, is this consistent with what we want to see and have said we want to see happen in the city. Zoning is not so finite, though, that you can predict what it's going to be in the future, in the sense that property owners, the city doesn't generally go out and rezone property for a certain kind of retail development if the property owner hasn't asked for that. But we try to use it as a guide when property owners come in and ask for zoning. It's different than zoning, but it does have some legal status in the sense that we're committed, I believe, under, and I may need to verify this, but under state law, to have the comp plan and utilize it as a guide. Now, when we went through that, I guess it was 17 or 18 community meetings and reviewed the 2012 plan, the overwhelming response to that was, we want to stick with that plan. And it was good, positive feedback. We did not go back as a result of those meetings and make actual changes to the language of the comp plan. The council could do that. We know that right now we need to make changes, some changes to our thoroughfare plan, just because things change. And so we're in the process of evaluating that thoroughfare plan as we're also evaluating our impact fee program and fees. And all of those things need to be updated on a regular basis. Impact fees every 5 years. The comp plan when we believe we have a need for it. But at this point, and based on those meetings, we did not see a need to physically change the comprehensive plan, although that could come up tomorrow, that we want something else, want something different in there. But you're aware, Mayor, and others on this call may be aware that as we've gone to council with zoning changes in the last 2 years, one of the things that the city had adopted in their comprehensive plan was this concept of neighborhood village zoning and urban village zoning, but it had never been implemented and adopted on it as a specific zoning change. But it allows for an easier process for doing development of different kinds and of mixed uses. And so the council has, in my opinion, in their wisdom, agreed to some of those changes in zoning to accommodate what they had placed in the comprehensive plan. So we've seen a lot of progress in that regard in the last couple of years.
Well, I think one of the questions that I'd have my answer, but I'll let you answer is, how do we determine there's overwhelming support by people who may not have any appreciable understanding of the plan? How do we say that, that probably there's a large portion to understand the plan, but I would argue at some point you've done 20 meetings out in the public. I mean, you're trying to get people to have an understanding of the plan. You're making the effort. And it's got to be a cooperative effort that citizens like the ones that are online here have to have that interest in showing us that, hey, we're interested in the plan. I'd like to give my input. I think we actually did a little bit better this time on board appointments. We got a lot of new faces, which is a positive. And hopefully we'll get more new faces. But
we did have a lot of applicants for board and commissions, advisory board at this time. And so there are a number of new people that council's appointed just last month.
And I think we actually found places for all of them.
I think that's right. I think
is the mayor suggesting citizen efforts equal city results? I'm not sure what that means. I'm just saying that as citizens, the city can only do so much in terms of trying to communicate that. It takes sort of a cooperative effort, civic engagement to do it, and the city can do more to get civic engagement, certainly. But it's a two-way street. And I think part of it for the person who asked the question is that local government generally just doesn't get the same generate the same interest usually, unless something goes terribly wrong, as opposed to what's going on at the national level. Usually at the national level, it's the biggest where everybody focuses. And as a government teacher, I will tell you that most of my colleagues who teach other things know nothing about local government, nor do they keep up with it. So yeah, I think that there has to be, actually, I think this is an irresponsible statement. Someone says, we the people are stupid and our leaders are smart. No, actually, I tend to think that the people are actually pretty doggone bright. I think that when you look at, there's a book by James Zawecki called The Wisdom of Crowds, that when you have a large group of people and they put in an input, it usually comes up to the right decision as opposed to a single person doing it, right? So it's one reason why, believe it or not, Wikipedia is very reliable, because you've got a large group of people contributing to the effort. So the larger group of people that you have in the community contributing to the effort, I think the better your results are going to be. So I think that was a little bit disingenuous, but anyway, going on, there was a question about crime.
About what?
There's the Madness Crowd, and there's also the Wisdom one too. I have the other one too. But anyway, there's some question about crime in Kennedale, and I would like to answer that one, but I think I may just try to get our police chief on and have the question, about what our crime statistics are and drugs in terms of drug crimes and things like that. Bring on our police chief for a future one. I think that would be a good question to have our chief to answer. Not that you can't answer it, but I think the chief would be.
No, I think it'd be better coming from the chief.
Yeah, I think so too. So in the long haul, we've got developments coming in. We're going to have the road projects popping in. We're going to have the infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure is key. We need more retail. Obviously, everybody agrees to that. I mean, I get calls about it. I'm sure as you do. What other challenges are we facing?
Other than those that we've been talking about?
Well, I think one of the things we haven't mentioned
Well,
is broadband. Broadband is an infrastructure issue. And I've heard from several neighborhoods that they don't have the connectivity that they need to be able to do a lot of their work at home. Oh,
I think that's what I'm hearing as well. I'm not real familiar with which areas of the city are the strongest, but clearly there are areas of the city that don't have as good a broadband and connection as and particularly right now. I mean, we've spent time in the last 6 months, not 9 months, trying to help the school district, for instance, get students better connected because they're having to do their activities from home. And it's been a real problem, not just because some of them don't have computers, but some of them don't have internet service at all. Others have very poor service. So clearly that is an issue, and it's going to get more important to everybody as we go forward than it is right now. And it's really an issue right now with everybody having to work from home.
Well, I've got like 3 other questions that are good questions. What is the status of the hotel up in Oakcrest?
Well, it's on hold in the sense that the original contract terms have not been achieved. The developer of that hotel, and it was and it's still a viable project. In fact, I'm trading phone calls in the last 2 days with that developer because he's indicated he's now ready to move forward. But the occupancy rates for limited service hotels in Tarrant County for the last year has not been good. It's getting better. And he's indicated to me he's ready to begin to move forward. So we're going to talk about how to keep that project moving forward, even though it wasn't done as soon as we had hoped, which was December of 2020. So we're negotiating that, but I think the project is still very much alive. I've visited with the Economic Development Board about it, and they have authorized me, as has the council, to renegotiate that contract to be sure that we don't let it expire. And we also are working with another limited service hotel in that same area. So if in fact the RevPAR for those hotels and the occupancy rates are on the incline at this point and don't take another nosedive because of COVID, then I think we will hopefully see within the next 12 months progress. That hotel, which is a Hilton True Hotel, they have submitted their plans. We have reviewed the plans, at least for the infrastructure portions of it. We have the plans in hand to do a final review of them when the developer tells us he's ready to move the project forward. So I think within the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see real progress on that hotel site and possibly another one as well.
So another question is, what about the safe routes to schools? Where are we in that? Remember, the council approved funding for that. Where are we on the safe routes to schools?
Well, that's another question that you'd probably be better off asking Melissa the details of it, planning director. But the Council of Governments has told us that, and they're working very closely with us on it. We've got some design work and utility relocates where those sidewalks are going to be routed. my hope is that within the next 12 months, we'll see that project under construction as well. And it's going to cause some disruption in those residential neighborhoods around the schools. But it's a safety issue that I think everybody's going to benefit from. And so the Council of Governments has been very helpful in providing funding for that. We're obviously providing some of it, some of the funding, but a majority of it is coming through the grant with the Council of Governments.
And another question was, when do you see the library and the senior citizens reopening?
Well, we don't know that. And the library is very active. They're doing a lot of work in making that ever since we terminated our contract with 60 or Better with the understanding that the library staff was going to take on the senior center programming. Obviously, the center hasn't been open, but they've made hundreds of calls, about 150 to 200 calls a week, just doing wellness checks, providing and working with Meals on Wheels to deliver meals to those people who are members of our senior program. That's continuing. And so the senior program, and we're trying to evaluate when we can reopen the center, but obviously that's a very vulnerable group of individuals. And we've got to be cautious about that and don't want to open it prematurely. So we don't have a date established at this point. Nor do we have a date for opening the library, although the library is continuing to serve people checkout materials, both digitally and hard copy materials from the library. They're working with citizens in a number of ways. So the library, and I'll be sending out a report to council about that probably within the next few days. And that's a good example of something that I hope we could get on our Facebook page and get information about those programs out to the public as well. But Amanda is constantly evaluating those programs, and we're working very closely with Meals on Wheels to be sure our seniors are accommodated.
And what about the playgrounds, opening those up again?
Well, we don't have a plan for that either. And again, it's you're aware that what the numbers are doing and the new strains of virus that we're being told about now. So I don't have a date for when those will be open to the public.
Yeah, because I've been very cautious about COVID. Tarrant County is one of the nation's hotspots right now for
Right.
COVID outbreaks, 25% positivity rate, the last I heard. And that's requiring us to keep some of these things shut down a little bit longer. I mean, I know people at the last meeting, somebody had asked us, when will the council meet in person? And I just thought, well, 40 people died of COVID the day before. It's better that we're being very cautious. We're able to get our business done via Zoom. But I know that everybody would like to get back into a normal routine, but right now I just don't think that's a good idea.
Well, obviously we've made some improvements to the building and to accommodate when we have appointments and meet people here in the building. We would like to see more public face-to-face meetings as well, but now is just not the time. And again, we as a city obviously can't make decisions for people on whether or not to get the vaccine. We're encouraging our employees to get them, our first responders, our other employees to get the vaccine. And I'm convinced personally that it's the right thing to do, and it's probably going to be what gets us back to those normal activities quicker. But clearly, we've all got a ways to go before that's available to everybody. But I'd certainly encourage people to think seriously about it. We've encouraged our employees to go online, apply for the vaccine appointments to get the vaccine, and then if they are for some reason not eligible right now, the county will advise them of that. But if they are eligible and willing to take it, I think it protects all of us. So that's just a personal opinion, and everybody needs to make that choice for themselves.
So somebody asked about tiny houses. Has any other city in Tarrant County embraced the concept of the tiny house? I think the smallest housing unit so far that we've really approved has been up in Oak Crest.
Right, and again, the term tiny house it may not be what those are because of the square footage, and they may be a little bigger than that, but those are the smallest ones, and that's a 6-unit development project up in Oak Crest. That, again, a lot of that property in Oak Crest is zoned residential. We'd like to see it develop, and that's an opportunity to provide some of uh, that housing mix that we need in the community and that every city needs in the community. So we've got 6 units that we think are going to move there pretty quickly that we're doing, that we've approved with in a partnership with, not city partnership, but the Housing Channel and UTA working very carefully together to get those projects. Now, we've also got a unit project approved at the intersection there of Bowman Springs Road and Kennedale Parkway, which is an unusually narrow parcel of ground as a result of the right-of-way purchase for Bowman Springs several years ago. We've now got a project going on or about to take shape. The council has approved for 16 single-family units on that parcel that will be single-family, but owned by one company. They will be individual units that are bungalow types of housing, and intended to be marketed mostly to seniors. So we've got some of those mixes that aren't normally done in the larger residential neighborhoods that Kennedale has enjoyed so far, but there's relatively few of them so far that have been approved, and we've got to find the right opportunity to do those in the right places where it makes sense. And what we're doing in Oakcrest, I think, is going to prove to be an enhancement to that part of the community, as are these on the Parkway.
When we talk about affordable housing, how's that? I mean, the market demands makes a lot of, the priorities there. We have houses going in at Oak Court. That's a 10-unit subdivision. It's a very small. There's no yards to these houses, and they're smaller houses, but the starting cost of those houses is from the 300,000s. For a lot of people, that's not really affordable housing.
Well, yeah. Now, those at Oaks Court weren't necessarily intended to be affordable in the normal sense that you think of affordable, but for seniors. And, a lot of seniors can afford more expensive housing. And so, but they don't want the property to maintain. They need smaller units, smaller houses with less yard. But a lot of folks that are seniors can afford more market rate housing, and that's what those in Oaks Court are going to be. I think that's going to be a very nice addition, but it will be primarily targeted for senior market. And again, one of those that I'm aware of is under construction right now.
So another question, let me just follow up here. Looking at the budget, when we look at the budget, how's the budget looking? I know we're still about 5 to 6 months out before we, as a council, start looking at how's the budget looking in terms of reserves, in terms of estimating what the effective tax rate will be next year. Have we got to those discussions yet at the staff level? Or
I really don't have numbers that I'd feel comfortable talking about this point. I think that the current fiscal year is going to, we're doing better in this current fiscal year from a standpoint of expenditures or the mix of expenditures and revenues, then we're going to have better than budget performance for a couple of good reasons. One of which is the fact that we always are concerned that Kennedale doesn't have retail and doesn't have a high dependence on sales tax. But in this environment we've been in for the last year, the fact that we didn't have a high reliance on sales tax has been somewhat of a saving grace, because our revenue comes from other sources and permits and ad valorem taxes, and we didn't lose the kind of revenue that some cities have lost. But we also have the benefit of being able to recover some of our budgetary costs through the CARES money that the city received to address COVID-related issues and really to supplant some public safety salaries. So our bottom line, the current fiscal year, we expect to be better performance than was budgeted, but I don't have enough detail yet on the And I don't think we didn't take a lot of hit like some cities did on sales tax. But we took some, and we just haven't got the numbers yet that would feel comfortable telling you what it's going to be, because I don't know. But I'm confident, just from my discussions with Makita, our finance director, that we're going to be in better than budget when we go into next fiscal year. And it's going to be an easier budget year than this last one was. But we're also really lagging behind in some areas. We're losing a lot of public safety employees, particularly fire, because we're 20 to 25% behind the curve on some compensation issues for public safety. And that hurts us every time we have to hire and train police and firefighters and then lose them to neighboring cities. So we've got some challenges facing us with regard to potential need to allocate debt service to infrastructure needs. We've got some operating expenses like compensation and maintenance on our infrastructure, roads, and things. There are going to be challenges, but I don't think they're going to be the same overwhelming challenges that we were facing last year and the year before.
The state's also going to be having a problem because they rely heavily on sales tax. 6.25% is the state sales tax. Cities can add another 2 cents on there. Do you see the state shortfall? Well, I mean, it got several, I think $13 billion from the federal government to help make up some of its shortfall. Do you see the state shortfall affecting us any at all?
Brian, I don't think I can answer that question, because I don't know whether it's going to have we don't receive much state money. So whether the state's got a shortfall or not, the state of Texas doesn't do much to support local governments financially directly through the budgetary process, as some other cities, some other states do. So we don't rely on it a lot.
We tend to be revenue generators for the state.
Well, we do. We generate a lot of revenue for the state through the municipal court, and every city does, because every time the state needs new money, that's a source they can go to and just direct that cities add fees to traffic fines, but we're adding it, spending the money to collect it, and doing all of those things and forwarding it to the state. We're not benefiting from a great deal of those fees. So we are kind of a vehicle for the state in that sense.
Well, George, you're still at your office, and it is about 8 o'clock. So I'm going to let you go, and thank you for showing up. We'll do it again sometime, but I will try to get Tommy on here and get Tommy to ask some questions from the police department. I think the public would like to hear from him as well. Maybe Tommy and the fire chief at the same time would be nice. But anyway, thanks.
I'd be glad to do that. I appreciate it. This might be a good forum to, as you were talking earlier about, how do we get the word out about some things? This is kind of a good way to do that, I think, where we can actually get questions from people and answer directly what they're thinking about. So anytime I can participate, I'd welcome that.
All right. Well, thanks, George, and thanks, everybody. And we'll see y'all later.
All right.
Good night.